dark of night, it brings refuge, and we ran and hide by light of the moon.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Chilla, aka So Chilla for those of you that are new. Today I actually wanted to do a movie review on the movie Cuties that was recently launched on Netflix. From my knowledge, it is actually a French movie that's dubbed in English, and they recently came out with it with a very controversial trailer, which is kind of what kicked off like just all of the backlash that the movie has had. Once I started to see all of the different kinds of commentary around it, and just it being like a constant trend, I figured I'd watch it for myself because it's only right that I give the movie an opportunity to redeem itself before really making any comments on it. I know people are gonna come for my neck for actually like seeing the message in the movie, but I really do think that this was more so a movie that really like realistically depicted what's going on in our society, and it's calling for us to make certain changes so that this is no longer our reality, essentially, you know. I'll probably break this video down into 3 components just because I feel like there was a lot of different topics that were brought into the conversation, and I also took some notes, so I'll make sure to try to reference back to them so that I can kind of like get a really good scope of just the conversation overall. I know like the first point that people want to, you know, draw on is how Cuties is over sexualizing these young girls, and to some extent I agree. I feel like some of the clips in or the scenes in the movie were not really necessary to like telling the story overall, but at the same time we live in a culture where outrage marketing is thriving, especially considering how Netflix had a different launch for America than it, or America and Canada than it did for other parts of the country. It just makes me realize kind of like that they are more so just trying to cater to what's normalized here. I mean, even when you do YouTube, like you have to kind of, you know, have really catchy or clickbaity titles as well, and then also kind of have some type of like imagery or video, like, or a little snippet that kind of like shows people like, okay, like is this something interesting or whatever like that, even if it's kind of just like a regular conversation. So I kind of understand why Netflix took the approach that they did, especially if their intention is to garner the most attention as possible. The unfortunate part is that it has, I guess, backfired to some extent though, because not only is Netflix getting the backlash, but also the director is getting backlash as well. And I'm not really gonna focus too much on attacking her in this video because I feel like at the end of the day it's her art, you know. Obviously this is a movie that we're watching, but it is her art, and she had an intention with the art that she created to stir up people's emotions, and for some people that may be something that's frustrating, but in my opinion I understand why she took the approaches that she took, and yeah, I'll be diving into that a little bit more. So in terms of just like the main characters, it focuses on, you know, a group of girls that are in a dance group, and one of the main characters happens to be from Senegal originally, but I think she immigrated with her family into France, and they are you know, they're a Muslim family, very conservative. Even, you know, her parents actually follow like polygamy apparently, and that's kind of like a turning point in the movie as well that happens in the beginning. And but nonetheless, she has to deal with just kind of like figuring out her identity and growing into her adolescence, while also trying to figure out how to like balance it all, of being from a different culture, but then trying to kind of like adjust to the Western world. The main premise of the movie is that, you know, Amy is really fascinated by Angelica, and which is more so of a secondary story. I feel like she kind of focused on a lot of the things that made me feel like this was just a depiction of like what's going on in our society, right? So Angelica is a young girl who has 2 parents, but the parents are focused on, you know, making a living and working and just trying to support them and her and her sibling. And not only are her and her sibling having like different issues at home, she feels the need to kind of like seek that attention elsewhere. So which is why she ends up diving into social media and diving into dancing, and trying to emulate the trying to emulate the older women that she sees dancing in different dance groups, as well as just trying to kind of like appear as more like older in general. And I don't think that was too far from the truth, honestly. I think that we live in a society where that is definitely just the reality, especially with like TikTok and Instagram. We want to believe that there's restrictions for these for younger kids to be able to access these things, but the reality is that internet now more than ever is accessible. And even when you try to look into like explicit content, that is something that's much more accessible too. And that also brings me to my my other point about how I feel like a lot of people are talking about how this movie is very pedo, but I think the reason why for me that wasn't the first point that like popped out to me is because of the fact that pedos can figure out their own, like, I don't know, I feel like there's so much like content out there for them, unfortunately, that I don't think they're going to be going into, oh, let me watch this Netflix movie specifically for that. Not to say that the depiction of these young ladies was completely appropriate, but it's more so just to get at that. If that's our focus, then I really do think that we should more so be frustrated by how people, like young kids on like TikTok or like Instagram or even YouTube are displayed or whatever. Even like I know there's like a dancing show, I think it's called like Dance Moms or something like that, and they have very similar imagery as well. And I think the movie is really more so to kind of evoke our emotions and our frustrations, to target these kind of things that are actually happening in our real life, and to make us more critical about what's going on in the real world. There is also another scene that was kind of like pivotal in the movie for Amy. She caught her mom crying. Her mom was breaking down, and she was talking about how she had to accept a second wife into the household and stuff. That for me, especially as a person who is from an African background that kind of like accepts polyamory, it made me really feel like it was just a relatable story, because of the fact that a lot of the times, especially within African culture, or maybe just kind of, or just conservative cultures in general, like I feel like a lot of times our parents don't really have the conversations that they need to have with us. So not only are they not really going to dive in deeper into what like the concept of a polyamorous relationship would like entail, but they also are not going to dive into sex conversations or period conversations also. There was another part in the movie where Amy had her period, and she was having a conversation with her grandmother, and her grandmother kind of just dived into this whole this drawn out thing of kind of just like being super excited that now she's found her womanhood, and she's looking forward to like marrying her off. She was kind of insinuating something along the lines of like, oh yeah, when I was your age, I was preparing, like I had just gotten an arranged marriage, and 2 years later I was actually in a marriage, and I think for people in the Western world, especially who haven't, where like child marriage is a little bit more regulated, that's kind of like an unnormal thing as well. And it's not to say that it should be normal, it's just more so to get at like just the culture barriers that may happen when people are kind of confused about like while watching the movie in general. I think those are realities that we have to deal with, and it's just the unfortunate part is that because there's that cultural barrier, the communication lacks, and we have a lack of emotional support, because we are in transition or in limbo of the different cultures of like kind of juggling between, you know, Western culture as well as a, you know, a conservative like African culture, you know. I also think that overall, like the theme of Amy just finding her sexuality throughout the movie makes sense as well, because when you're coming from a conservative background and not only are you not having conversations about being on your period, you're also definitely not having conversations about, you know, what your first sexual experience is going to be or what's your first like sexual like milestone will be, that you have more curiosity about like that side, or you feel like it is more liberating. And the unfortunate part is that our music and our media kind of also confirms that for young girls that are growing up, that they feel like, you know, your sexuality is a huge portion of who you are and, you know, who you're going to be. So it's kind of like, well, what do we expect of them, you know? I don't think that any of the things that were in the movie were like far off from our reality. And I think instead of being so mad at the movie, we need to be mad at ourselves and really think about how we can influence, you know, young girls and boys growing, to allow them to grow into their identity without the pressures of society and the whole weirdness of everything. I mean, if we as adults are struggling with our body identity and autonomy based on the things that society has set for us, then we need to be careful about how many things that we normalize within our social media, as well as like just how, you know, we censor our behaviors around these young kids. And I know that people are always constantly saying like, oh, well, you know, if it's your child, then you should raise them yourselves. But the reality is that in the age of media, we're raising these children hands off, you know, and even if that's not something that we want them to stumble upon, it's very accessible to a point where we need to have more explicit conversations about these things, you know. Another last point that I wanted to make is that I know people are really confused about there was a scene in the movie where Amy was getting an exorcism. And I felt like it was important to have this conversation, especially as an African person, or especially just kind of like, yeah, like coming from a culture where that's a little bit more normalized. I think that unfortunately we tend to not take mental illness seriously, and or just like deviant behavior. So like behavior that's deviating from our cultural norms, we constantly, you know, assume that it's like, oh, you know, this is demon, like this is something that you must have some you know, evil spirit within you that's kind of like taking you over. And what I took from the clip itself of Amy kind of like just, you know, dancing and like, I don't know, she was like shaking and stuff like that. I feel like she was trying to play along so that she wouldn't have to deal with the consequences after the fact. Because when you try to explain to your parents that, no, I'm not going crazy, like this is literally something that I'm just trying to figure myself out, or this is something normal, they don't really believe it. They're so stuck in their like old cultural ways that they keep thinking that it's more so something that can get prayed away, or kind of can't really explain to these people like, no, this is just like, I'm just growing into myself or whatever, because it's just like, yeah, like the cultures are so different, and it's like, it just doesn't make sense. But I really liked how they ended the movie. I feel like that was a really powerful way, because that's kind of really what people are, you know, these young people are looking for, especially when they're going through all these things. They just are simply looking for acceptance and looking to be affirmed. And I hope that at the very least, like the adults and, you know, people that, like the parents that have watched the movie are getting that. And then for the ones of us that are, you know, yet to be parents, that we can learn from it, especially in the digital age. Like we have to learn from it, because this is our reality, and we got to make sure to support our young generation as they're coming into their, you know, adolescence and adulthood. Anyways, let me know what you guys think down below. I know my perspective is not the common one, but I'm just being honest based on my, you know, experience, especially as an African woman. hopefully you guys kind of, you know, are able to have an amicable conversation in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Peace.
So I want to say thank you to my mom. She tell my smoke. How low, wherever you say I will go.